founders. A salesperson that is willing to take a job when it's not been sorted, beware. Because they're taking a job because they need a job. A great salesperson is making so much money in their existing role that you have to poach them and show them why they need to join you. That's who your great salespeople are.
And welcome everyone to our new podcast with Revenue Squared. Today we have with us Abel. She is the co-founder of Jellyfish. My intro is going to be incredibly short because I actually want you to start introducing yourself. What does Jellyfish do? What do you do? And let's kick it off from there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jen. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Jellyfish. We have been around for almost 8 years. We've worked with over 350 different B2B and enterprise startups. And our maniacal focus is the 0 to 1 journey, also defined as your first million of ARR in the US market. Only know US sales, never done anything outside of US sales. So just know that anything we talk about pertains to the US market and may or may not translate into other markets.
That's great. So also to give a bit of context to your background, it would be great to dive into each of the segments, no? Because I think you have a very interesting trajectory, right? So you joined General Assembly at its inception, right? All the way up to 8 million in ARR. And then you spent a couple of years at the Muse, almost really kicking things off from 0 to 2, if I'm not mistaken, like holding hands with the founders, 0 to 2 million in 18 months, which is a very cool story as well. And I'm sure our friends from Revenue Square elsewhere, I'll be able to learn some good insights. And then later at Jellyfish, supporting over 200 B2B enterprise startups, conquering the US market. I know you've helped some European companies, you helped some Asian companies. We have a lot of founders and go-to-market leaders in the community who want to take that step, coming from Spain and elsewhere in Europe, right? And so we can dive into those different sections, but let's take it from there. Like, why did you join General Assembly at inception? One of the things we talk a lot about here, also in terms of in the revenue realm, let's say, is choosing the right companies, right? Which is important. So, like, why did you choose General Assembly?
You know, every company that I ended up joining early in my career, I was really, really passionate about the problem they solved. I mean, it is so hard to be a salesperson at an organization where you do not believe in the product. So General Assembly is a New York City darling. When I first went to them, I had no startup experience. I didn't go to one of those fancy schools that have that produce a lot of entrepreneurs, like your Stanfords and your Harvards and your MITs. And when I volunteered at a hackathon just to get in front of the founder. And the hackathon was actually with American Express. Kind of funny, right? Like American Express sponsoring a hackathon, which it just shows you where the world was going at this point. And they were like, listen, we'll let you contract for 3 months, but like you have to they're like, I don't know if you have a background for this. And I'm like, okay, I'll do whatever it takes. I just want to be a part of this vision and mission and like be a part of or as Sheryl Sandberg always says, take a seat on the rocket ship. And they gave me 90 days to prove myself. They're like, if you can get a deal closed in 90 days, we'll bring you on full time, even though we're not sure we need you yet. I'm like, okay, deal. So I, in 90 days, was able to close my first deal at the 60-day mark, which I actually, looking back, I don't know how I did it, truthfully, because it was an enterprise deal. But like total outlier, I think luck was on my side at that point. And I was brought in full time. The big thing that was really important learning, which is what led to Jellyfish, and fast forward in the story, is when I got on, I joined the enterprise team and they didn't have a product built yet. And the founder said, listen, go out and talk to the market and then we will build whatever they want. And I quickly learned that that's not how you do sales. Because they kept saying like, what do you want to talk about? And I'm like, I don't know. What are you open to talking about? And it was this like weird conversation where I had nothing to talk about and expected them to give me this aha moment. So then I went back to the founder and I said, listen, they need to hear from you. You're the visionary. I'm just the salesperson. I'll do all of the execution behind you, but will you join these calls so I can not only learn from you, but really start to isolate and focus some of these conversations. So quickly I learned you need to go to market with the aha to give to them. Don't expect the market to give you an aha. So did that for General Assembly, then went off to a YC backed startup called the Muse. And then, we quickly got some founders reach out to us while we were at the Muse to say, hey, how do I hire people like you? How do I find people like you that know how to do early stage sales? And that was the aha for us, which was like, oh, wait, I think there's actually a business here.
That's
That was
awesome.
back in like 2017, 2016. Yeah.
I want to circle back to a topic that is close to your heart, which is founder-led sales later in
Yeah.
the conversation, because I think you shared a framework that I really like, making distinction from 0 to 1 and different phases, no,
Mhm.
like founder-led, and then how and when to do that transition and who to hire at each stage, which I think is very helpful. And there might be some parallels to Europe, but
Yeah. Yeah.
let's leave that for later. Tactically speaking, when you, for our audience who are SDRs here or people who want to go into sales, when you
Yep.
went into General Assembly, you mentioned an American Express in, right? I don't know if it was an event or how, like, what
I
did you
bet. Yeah.
do? What did you do? Like, how did you get
So,
wind
yeah.
of this event?
This is when like the New York City hackathon ecosystem was like budding. I went in, I said, listen, I want to be a part of whatever this is. I'm not a programmer. I'm not a designer. I don't even fully have sales skills, but I want to figure out how I can get involved. And they're like, okay, well, you can volunteer. We'll need help putting out food and things like that. And I was like, okay, well, that's my way to get to the founders, because I know the founders were going to be there because it was a big event that they were putting on that was going to be, I think Mayor Bloomberg was going to be there too. It was like this whole thing. And I said, if I just do whatever it takes to get in front of the founders, maybe they'll give me a shot. Maybe they'll heal me out. Maybe there's something that I can support them on, right? It all comes down to like unmet needs and problems. And I didn't know that at the time, but quickly realized that this stuff is so hard. Like startups are incredibly hard. It's a grind. It's not made for the faint of heart. And if you go out of your way to show someone how much you value their vision, people are willing to take a chance on you because they know you'll be through it in the depths of how hard this becomes. And I think people get really excited by folks that fundraise. People get really excited by, you know, um, shiny objects. But then when it gets hard, they're like, well, wait, I didn't sign up for something to be this hard. I'm going to leave. So, um, it's the earlier you are in your career and the more passion you show towards a problem and a business model, the more people are going to willing to take a chance on you, especially if you don't come from a startup experience or have that fancy school behind you. And I'm proof of that.
And so you found out there was this event in New York City. You went to the event. You found the founders, and you just
Yeah.
walked up right up to them,
Yeah.
and then you told them, "Hey, I love what
Well,
you're doing."
yeah, so it was Matt Reimer, who's a wonderful individual. And he said to me, he goes, build a business case as to why we should hire you. Like, so they put all the work on me, right? This was again when it was really hard to get a job at a startup. So I was like, okay, so I picked a target market. I was like, advertising agencies, if they don't train their talent in this digital ecosystem, they will become obsolete, right? Because they were all about print and video and all of that. So I was like, you guys should target ad agencies. And they're like, well, I don't know. Their margins are smaller, but they do value their people. That's all they are. So like build a business case. So I like actually looked up there's some publicly traded advertising companies like WPP and Interbrand or whatever the other one is. And I looked at their spend for learning and development. And I was like, if you can capture 1% of this, it equates to whatever millions of dollars. So he was like, okay, that sounds good enough. Again, it's all about just, is this market big enough to sustain the development of it? So that was my first close, was an advertising agency, which is where I came from. So I knew I could speak to it, but I had no business selling to them. And then I focused there and then quickly expanded that um, once I became full-time.
Awesome. And at what point did you realize that early stage was for you, right? Because it's not the obvious choice to make. Like
Yeah,
you might
you
have,
have
you
to be
might have,
crazy. You
yeah.
have to be crazy to like the early stage. Because it's a treasure hunt, and that to me is super exciting. Like I get the adrenaline rush of getting to that aha after 10 no's. There's nothing more fun to me than that. And I think if you don't have fun in early stage sales, it's a terrible place to be. If you can't make it fun, it can be grueling. Um, so it's for me, it's a treasure hunt. I love working with founders. I love being able to bring someone's vision into a reality or to the reality. And there's nothing more exciting than that first sale. It's like when you get
Sweet.
that first dollar and you stick it up at the restaurant.
Yeah,
Or
for
is that
sure.
maybe
Like
that's
one
more of
thing.
an American thing, but
No, 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 that sticks out. It's something that we talk a lot here as well. Like you prioritize, and I think it's the right way to do it. Like you have a passion for the type of sales that you're going to do. You prioritize the product, the solution, the
yeah,
problem that you're working on versus the brand, right?
yeah,
Which I think we're getting there here. Cool. And then the muse, right? So you leave General Assembly and you say,
yep,
okay, I'm going to go even smaller, earlier,
yep,
crazier. What's
yep,
the muse? How do you choose
yeah.
them?
Now, granted, I went earlier because that's all I know, right? Like to
Hmm.
me, the going from 10 to 100 is very, very different than going 0 to 1 or even 1 to 10. So I joined the Muse because they were going up market, right? They built and showed incredible traction. I think they raised their Series A on selling to startups at that time and small businesses, and they were looking to crack the enterprise market, which was what they deemed the Fortune 1000. So they said, hey, very similar to General Assembly, I want you to come in and sell to that very similar target market. And that's where I met my now co-founder, Justin. And we had a target that we had to hit. And we actually joined up forces and split the commissions together because they were like, he's really good at this piece and I'm really good at this piece. And if we join forces and split commissions, it's a win-win for both of us. And we get good cop, bad cop in the conversations. So that's how I met my co-founder and how I built so much trust with him is because day one, well, not day one, it was probably like month one. We joined forces and split commissions and got the approval from them to split commissions. It's something interesting. You might want to like, I don't know if anyone does it or it's frowned upon, but it was something that not only built this beautiful partnership between him and I, but the business loved it because um, there was coverage on all deals. It wasn't like if Justin was out of office, something didn't go. Like there was coverage. And also enterprise deals are really, really hard, right? At that point, early stage startups, people weren't used to partnering with startups, so they wanted to meet you face to face. So we were able to like divide and conquer. I managed top of funnel, the mid funnel. He managed procurement and closing. Two very different skill sets. We both had learned both of them, but I was able to just um, move a little bit faster and vice versa on his part. So it was a wonderful thing and something if I didn't have him, I would 1000% do over and over and over again because it's nice to have a co-partner in sales when it's a very lonely job.
And what type of sale was this, right? Can you describe a little bit the problem that the Muse was solving?
Yeah, at that time they were selling basically employment branding. Like they were the first ones to kind of bring to light employment branding, meaning how do you build a brand around your employer persona, right? To attract talent, attract the right engineering talent, right? Our first deal that we closed was actually with New York Life. The CIO, we sold to the CIO. One would think, oh, this is an HR tech solution. It wasn't at the time. That's all obviously all since evolved, but we sold to the CIO of New York Life, who is since
Amazing.
now still a close friend. Yeah.
And so you finish up this episode, right? About 2 years in, and you have an aha moment. You found someone who you could work with because
Yep.
and this happens often. Like a lot of times founders ask us, hey, I'm looking for a co-founder. A lot of the time I tell them to look back in their life and feel who they had a little bit of a crush, a professional crush on, and
Yeah.
look there, right? And so how does this start? And why do you build
Why did we
Jellyfish?
launch Jellyfish? Yeah, so it was a total, we thought we would do it for 6 months. Justin and I were like, oh my God, like, it is well, it's still a grind. But we were like, I wonder if we can just like consult with like one or two different companies and just like get more experience in different verticals and like, work for ourselves for 6 months. And if it doesn't work, well, a salesperson's failure rate is pretty low. If it doesn't work, you just go on to the next thing, right? So we're like, let's test it out. So we built Jellyfish. We had two clients right off the bat that wanted to work with us. And we were like, oh, probably one of them will hire us in 6 months and we'll go back full time. And I would have never, ever, ever, ever did we think it would turn into this, ever. The market pulled it out of us. An international startup called Pursuit approached us and said, hey, we're thinking about US expansion. We don't want to make the full investment in hiring, 2 or 3 US folks. Can we test it out with you for 3 to 6 months to make sure it's the right fit before we put, hundreds of thousands of dollars into this investment? And we're like, oh, that's a really good idea. Sure. So we did that and we're like, oh my God, it's not US startups that need us as much as these international companies, right? Who really need it, because coming into the US is such a wild, wild west and so foreign and so nuanced that if we can help them validate something in 90 days to then make a much bigger investment, I think we're onto something. And that's where this took us. And now, actually, ironically, 80% of the companies we support right now are now US-based startups because of the environment and this importance of founder-led sales finally. And then I think the international market's obviously going to pick up once the kind of the macro environment shakes out a little bit more.
And how
What
did this
what
first client find you? Oh, sorry, Lucian. Shoot afterwards.
no, the first client, don't worry, go with Ivan's question, then I'll
So
shoot mine later.
I'm pretty sure the first client found us because they were going to hire this gentleman named Anurag Verma, who's one of the best salespeople I have ever worked with. And he was like, I don't know if I want to work for a company there's so many unknowns. And he was obviously doing very, very well in his previous job. And he's like, you should talk to this company, Jellyfish. They do this fractional thing. They might be a better fit than me at that time. So they made the introduction, and that's kind of how it got started. So our third client ever was an Australian company looking to expand into the US market.
Amazing.
I was actually going to
Lucian.
ask about companies that look to expand into the U.S. market, right? Because we've had some members who have founded companies or that are
Yep.
actually taking their company to the U.S. And there are many questions when it comes to that because people are afraid, different market, completely different culture in many senses. What are the biggest misconceptions or the biggest takeaways you've had from European companies moving to the US? What are the big 3 things maybe, or maybe it's one
Yeah.
that's the main, right?
For European companies, the biggest misstep they make is most of the time they probably are in the UK to some extent. Like they'll go, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they'll go like, they'll start in France, maybe they'll expand into the UK and then go UK into the US. It's usually UK to the US, what we see in most cases. Maybe that's
Mm.
changed, but from our experience, it's mostly UK to the US. And they assume that the UK is similar to the US market or a close adjacency. That's very, very far from the truth. The US market is radically different market than any market out there. What you think worked in the European market never translates cleanly into the US, or we've never seen it. And I think the go to markets in Europe are very fragmented, right? Like how you sell in Germany is different from how you sell in France, which is different than how you sell or how they buy in the UK. So it's a much more fragmented market versus the US is far more homogeneous in the sense of you could sell to someone in New York. It's not going to be, I mean, it's not, it's so closely adjacent to how you would sell to someone on the West Coast. So, I mean, obviously the coasts are going to be more innovative, but there's a lot more homogeneous like translation that happens in the US. So once you're here, that logo in Massachusetts still carries weight to logo in Florida, right? Versus, a logo in France. I don't know if that fully translates to a UK company to say, oh yeah, that's close enough. So again, I think there is this big misunderstanding that traction or product market fit in Europe translates into the US. I've never seen it. And actually, the longer you wait to expand into the US market, the harder it is to find product market fit. Like we've seen that over and over and over again. It takes 2 to 3 times as long for a mature European company versus an early stage European company to find traction in the US.
That's interesting. So like we have a bunch of companies in the portfolio, some of them successfully expanding to the US, but there's often this hesitancy of we'll do it once we have more cash in hand. We'll do it when we can allocate, which makes sense, right? So oftentimes they are proving product market fit in different European countries still. So like, how do you allocate for that? And maybe if I take the question one level above, right? Like, you speak often of segmenting out the US market into enterprise,
Yep.
mid-market, and
Yeah.
smaller accounts, right? So like, what type of company should think about expanding to US earlier? Maybe if we frame it this way.
Mm.
So you make me want to say a good clarification point there. When I say homogeneous, I mean culturally homogeneous.
Mhm.
Mm.
Segment wise, there are more segments in the US market than anywhere else on the planet. There are subsegments upon subsegments upon subsegments. Like it's insane. You can get totally lost here. So thank you for making me clarify that because I could see how someone can misinterpret that. So there is, I think the number is actually, can I pull up a slide?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Able?
of course.
All right, hold on. Let me pull something up. So I can actually show you guys something. So let me show you the number of private and publicly traded companies in the US market. This does not account for farming jobs or the government sector. So just keep that in mind and when you're looking at this. Let me share screen. Let's see here. Share screen. Share this. Okay. Can you guys see my screen? We good?
Yep.
We're good.
Okay. So these are just assumptions, but this is census data that shows you the number of companies there are in the US. Let me break this down for you because I know this is a lot. There are 6 million businesses in the US market. See how it says total? 6 million firms. Okay. This is a breakdown of how those 6 million firms bifurcate based off of the employee count. So you have bifurcation based off of employee count, and then you have the total employment to the right-hand side in the US market. So what you are seeing here is that the enterprise has more employment than any other segment and only has around 4,300 total companies here. The mid-market, which spans between upper end of SMB and lower end enterprise, has a significant amount. And then the small business, there's tons of, most of the firms, there's about 4 million firms of those 6 million. So call it, 80, 75, 80% of firms are small business, but look at how small their employee count is and their willingness to spend. So this is like a little bit of power law at play. We don't talk about mid-market because mid-market is such an amalgamation and misinterpretation of what's actually happening. When people say they play in the mid-market, there are two things at hand. Are you upper end of small business because it bookends small business, or are you lower end enterprise because it bookends enterprise? And if you say you are both, it's the valley of death. That's why I say valley of death is in the middle. Because if you say you're both,
Interesting.
you're straddling two very different go-to-markets. One of high velocity that's much more predicated to marketing led, and one of
Yes, sir.
high value, which is much more predicated to sales led, right? So when someone says, "Oh, we have a client of 10,000 that's, we sold for 10,000 and we have another client that sold 100,000," a red flag goes up to me because I'm saying, "Oh, they're playing two different go-to-market games here, and they haven't mastered one yet." So the risk of them being great at one now diminishes. So now they're going to be more of an okay player, which you can't go raise a Series A, Series B on okay. So this is all just to show when you come to the US market, look at how massive it is. Look at the different subsegments you play in, but each subsegment has a different go-to-market game affiliated with it. And these are just the rough land values that they come in at. And to the left
That's
side of,
incredibly interesting because
yeah,
in Salesforce, for example, one thing that I've noticed is, and of course, Salesforce is headquartered in the US, so many of the plays in terms of segmentation and in terms of go-to-market come from the US,
yeah,
and they tend to segment a lot, even inside what everyone would call mid-market. We have three different sections subdivided into 5 or 6 different industries, subdivided into something else. So what it ends up happening is you're starting to specialize. And I imagine to a certain extent, and correct me if I'm wrong, when someone goes to the US, they have to choose that first segment they want to go to
that's it.
and get a go-to-market strategy that's
You
just for
nailed
that
it.
segment.
Because it's a process of elimination. Because look at the lifts required in each of these segments. If you're saying you're doing upper end of small business and lower end enterprise, look at the difference in conversations you need to have, which changes the way you go to market, right? You can't sales leg your way to 111 monthly calls, right? Appropriately. I mean, I guess if you hire 25 salespeople, but then your costs far exceed your revenue. So this is again just an understanding of, based off of a 15% blended win rate between inbound and outbound, what the lift is to get your initial million in ARR. And then the subsegments. And then obviously there are subsegments within each of these segments. This is just like a very high level macro view of it.
This is interesting. Okay, so it's very interesting because the actual landscape is so different, proportionally speaking, in terms of type of enterprise in Spain, particularly with the US, for once. But then,
how so?
In Spain, we have a tremendously disproportionate large number of very, very, very small businesses, very few mid-sized businesses, and even fewer, obviously, enterprises, right? Like, and it's also a country that it has many advantages, and we've done a lot of great things, but some of the best companies that have come out of here, like I'm thinking one of our portfolio, Flywire, was also based in America, between New York and Valencia. So a lot of the success cases also have or tend to have success internationally from almost day one, right? But it's interesting from a go-to-market lens. It's just very interesting how different the landscape is and how you're doing the napkin math up front, right? When thinking about this. So to bring this back to Spanish founders specifically, or Spanish salespeople thinking of expanding in the US, based on what you just showed us, you can expand regardless of what market you're targeting, but just beware of not being in between segments, right? Particularly lower end enterprise, or what you call lower end enterprise, and high end SMB.
Oh, you froze for a second. We back?
Yeah, we're back.
Go. Sorry about that. So you were saying for Spanish sellers, be very careful about not playing between two segments, and then you got cut out.
Yeah, so that's my takeaway, right? Like you can go and sell in the US in any segment, but just beware of being in between. Is there any part, if you segment that out, like is there a particular type of company that targets a particular segment that would, in your experience, would do better from the get-go if they decide to expand in the US?
Yes. The number one mission critical thing is if US expansion is led by a founder, right? Because we know with full confidence that the go-to-market and product market fit will not translate into the US, which means that visioning needs to be reevaluated for how that aligns with the US market reality. And it's never on the first try will the founder get it. It's usually the second or third iteration. There's this idea that the adjacency is where all of the gold lives once you come into the US. It's, one or two steps removed from the ICP or the use case. If you put a non-founder in that role to figure out that vision, they are set up to fail. Because only a founder can see something forming that they weren't looking for on day one, knowing that the day one thing isn't going to work. So if you are a European seller, be very, very, very careful to take that on yourself, because only a visionary is going to be able to see that. But more importantly, you're going to need the founder to navigate when there's no brand equity here yet either, right? And no one's going to trust an international company where the founder is not the tip of the spear. It's very hard to build that brand equity. So I think one is just that really deep importance of having the founder lead it and guide in terms of, and again, it's a process of elimination. Start in one subsegment. If it's not working, cross it off the list, take those learnings and move to the next. Where is that rejection redirecting you? So many founders will try and hedge it as a way to hope that it increases their surface area of luck. However, I always tell founders, when you hedge it, everyone feels it. Your market, your investors, and your team. And it is suggesting you don't know who your customer is. So be very, very, very careful about hedging it. Go one by one and saying, listen, this is not the right fit, or it's not tight enough, or there's not enough pull, and we're going to cross this off the list. We think there's better opportunity. So I think that that's like the really important piece too about, being a seller in the European market, a lot of founders will tap you to say, hey, go sell into the US. It's a big regret so many people have, which is I wish I had the founder be that tip of the spear, and I wish I had them validate it first before I dove in and had all my objectives tied to it.
Got it. And does that mean, or is there a general recommendation you mentioned earlier? If you're going to go to the US, do it earlier in
Yes,
your journey. But then two, it should be the founder that actually goes and does
correct.
the US physically, right? Or at least
Correct.
do you time box that? Like what sort of resources do you typically recommend a company dedicates to this, right?
Yeah. So the reason why I say the earlier the better is because the longer you wait, the more the team and the product becomes formalized for that international market, which means it's harder to unwind, right? The founder thinks that they're further along than they are. The product is now really baked for this existing market. Um, the objectives you set for US expansion are usually much higher because it's later. And everyone, you start to just stack the odds against yourself a little bit to figuring it out in the US. Or we've worked with, so here's an example. We've worked with a late stage international company and we invalidated everything across the board. Invalidated everything, right? Meaning the way they thought about it was not fully correct with what the US market wanted because they were entering a very crowded market. So we went back to the founder and we said, listen, like we need to go after a different segment or have a different vision we're testing because there's too much invalidation to justify spending any more money here. So he said, okay, that's fine, but I'd rather put my head of sales on this. I think it's me. I think I'm just not able to sell. It wasn't that. That's just easiest to say because it's hard to have invalidation, but it wasn't him not being able to sell because we were right alongside him. It was the vision just didn't fully align. So we're like, okay, if you were really not going to do it, well, what are we left to do? Even though looking back, we should have just kind of kiboshed it there. So they brought in a head of sales to join us. What do you think that head of sales did about a month and a half in? This is too hard. Not worth it. Don't think we should do this expansion. Too much of a lift. I'm going to focus on scaling out what we're already doing in this local market or this international market. So then their investors reached out and were like, what's going on? I'm like, listen, you got to talk to the founder. I talked to them. I'm not quite sure. But then the investor, said, hey, we had a long discussion with the team and it's so frustrating to hear that they were retracted back from the US because some salesperson said it was too hard. And that will always happen because US sales is incredibly hard. It's the most crowded market. It is so hard to figure out how to differentiate yourself. So if you expect a non-founder to sort it, right, you're setting them up to fail too. And you're setting them up to be biased to wanting to spend their time where the revenue is going to be, where the revenue is easier. Not necessarily more valuable to you, but easier. So these are just some of the traps we've seen over and over again and why we are so maniacal about doing founder-led sales because we've done the non-founder thing and it just it decreases the chances of finding it.
And how does that work then? So how should a founder think about this? Let's say they've raised a late seed or Series A. The company has some reserves. They're going to that phase. They want to go into the US early. I'm a founder. I don't want to fall into this trap. I have a clear idea of what segment I'm attacking in the US because I've talked with Jen. And so what do I do? Do I go to the US Embassy and ask for an entrepreneur visa and bring my best SDR with me under my wing? Like what does that look like? What do I tell my wife and kids? Like how long is this going to be and how do I do it?
The visa thing, I actually don't know because we've never been a part of that process. So I would say ask your VCs. They probably have a better idea. You probably have a better idea than I do on how to navigate that. When it comes to expectations of what it's going to take to land in the US market, I need the founder to have the mindset of this is back to 0 to 1. Okay. Nothing has been proven. Your traction elsewhere carries no weight. No one wants to hear you're working with,
IKEA
UK doesn't carry any weight. They're just like, okay.
Yeah.
And if it carried weight, IKEA UK would make an introduction to their counterpart in the US, which never happens. So there's your proof to say don't rely on it. So treat it like 0 to 1. You need to write down your vision. What do you want to actively go out and test so that the market can help you understand what they care about? Do not have open-ended discussions that are going to lead to nothing. You're just going to go meeting to meeting, collecting a bunch of noise. The only way that you're going to find the pulse is by testing vision and getting them to the aha. They're not going to give you the aha. Going back to that statement. Expect it to take about a year. Like it will probably take a year to not only sort it, but maybe get your first 1 to 2 clients, depending on the segment you're in. I always tell founders, expect it's going to take twice as long and cost twice as much. That's just the best expectation to set. And if you get a ton of invalidation, cross off the target segment you're talking to or the assumptions you're testing and move to the next. And I know that's easier said than done, but treat it like a process of elimination. The more you go out and talk to disperse multiple different types of ICPs, the more noise you're introducing into the system. The harder it is to find signal. Because what a mid-market financial services company cares very different than what a small business financial service company. Different maturity, different processes, different risks. So just be very careful who you're learning from. And I always tell this to founders, who you learn from dictates the insights you're going to collect. And you need to keep those conversations consistent because consistency unlocks repeatability. Just because someone wants to talk to you, don't take the call. It's just going to create more noise. And I get it. Most people are like, oh, but they're willing to talk. I'll learn something. I'm like, they're outside of where you want to learn. What are you doing? You're setting yourself up for false momentum, false insights, and you're now going to go tell a VC you just spoke to so-and-so, and you don't even have a way to service them. So just be really, really honest with yourself, with your learnings, and with your investors. Because most people, I think probably that are on this are VC backed. Be really honest with your investors. They'd rather hear why things are not working than you telling them something's working and then the results never come.
Awesome. We only have 3 minutes left. So one follow-up question to that, like how should a company de-risk this decision, right? Because we're talking about significant commitment of a founder, might be the CEO, maybe not, probably yes, going to a different geography, new culture, new everything, family, money, budgeting. You said twice as much time, twice as much budget. Someone needs to run the European operation when it's just starting to traction, right? You're late seed Series A. So it's almost like you need 2 people. Okay, like how do we do this? Like how do we de-risk?
So, I mean, that was a layup question because that's literally why we built our business model. So thank you for that. So we literally did this to de-risk this for founders, right? Which is once you have if you're building for your local market on day 1, get that running before you even think about US. Get your local market up and running, validated, get your customers in, and then replace yourself. Don't try and do 2 different things. So you're either building for the US market on day 1 or you're building for your local market on day 1. Focus there. So let's just assume it's your local market. So get that up, get that running, get your general manager in, and then only, now you can focus all of your time on the US. Now we built our business model to help founders figure that out in 90 days. Remove Jellyfish for a second. It's probably going to take them a year because you're going to have to sort it. You're going to have to understand how to craft good assumptions. You're going to have to understand what an ICP is, which ICP you want to go after. How do you engage them? Like it's just whole thing where the people will actually hire full-time talent to do it. And that's the problem is you're hiring full-time talent to do something that's not sorted. So they're not going to know how to do it. But most importantly, and I say this all the time to founders, a salesperson that is willing to take a job when it's not been sorted, beware. Because they're taking a job because they need a job. A great salesperson is making so much money in their existing role that you have to poach them and show them why they need to join you. That's who your great salespeople are. And I constantly tell that to founders.
But I completely agree with the fact that those people that you want to hire are never going to come inbound to sell for you just because. There's because just following up on Jellyfish, right? We had the fact that you've supported over 200 B2B enterprise startups, and following up into the layup question from before, right? What are some of the patterns that you found in the most successful ones throughout that
Yeah.
experience?
So the most successful founders that I'm always excited by, like I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be awesome. They come to the table and say, here are all my known unknowns. No idea, need to validate it. There's so much I need to learn. Versus your first time founder that says, hey, we just need to go scale this thing. Right. So it's the ones that know that it's not validated until it's validated. They're few and far between, but those founders are always so exciting to work with. So like that's one pattern recognition. Day one, before I even have to shift their mindset, they come and say, here are the 6 things I actively need to go out and figure out that I don't have sorted yet. That's usually going to be, by the way, your second time founder because they've gotten bopped on the head before. So that's one. The second is founder runs and knows that this is their job. The minute I have to convince a founder it's their job is the minute I'm like, oh, I don't know if we really want to be doing this work because we're going to be set up to fail if it's not the founder, right? The third is no one in the world is going to give you vision. It's your job as the founder to write that down and test it. Don't expect the market to give you vision. Certainly don't expect Jellyfish to give you vision. We're just going to put you through a process. But you need to come to the table with what do you believe the US market is faced with and why do you think they should care? And then the fourth piece is get out of the everyone wants to test when we do assumptions. Everyone wants to test assumptions that they know they're going to get a yes to because it feels good. It feels like you're moving forward. It feels like momentum. But the minute you test something you already have the answer to is the minute you're not learning. The minute you're uncomfortable and you know that you could get a no to this thing is the minute when you get that nuanced insight that takes you off. So we always tell founders, if you want to test stuff that you already know the answer to or are going to lean into a yes, don't work with us. You don't need us because that's not going to do anything for you.
They have to run away from confirmation bias.
I want you to feel uncomfortable. I want you to feel like you're testing something that you're going to get a hard no to, because again, that hard no gets us closer to that pulse. And do not be afraid of invalidation. Invalidation is the prerequisite to get to validation. No one starts day one with validation. And if you look at any company, this is my last thing. We'll look at any company that got to product market fit. Their day one market vision was never the same vision that took them to product market fit. Not one.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen. I know you have a really good Twitter account where I found you as well. So I encourage everyone who listens to this to follow Jen Abel on Twitter and also LinkedIn.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm going to follow you right away.
A lot of
anything else? Anything else? How can people follow you? Is there anything else you want to share?
Twitter, I mean, feel free to DM me if you have direct questions or specific questions. Yeah, Twitter's the best. That's where I usually I'll spend more. No, email things get lost. Twitter, it's much easier to see what's going on. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much,
That's
Jen.
actually how Ivan and I met. So
Yeah.
fantastic place.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Take
Have
care.
a great
Bye.
day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.